Hello, everyone. We're having some slight technical difficulties because, as is Murphy's Law, right before stream is when cameras have to break down. I feel like that's just what StreamYard expects of us at this point. But we're gonna try and make this work, and if there's any issues, we'll just jump into a sooner, like an earlier sprint, and then fix things in backstage and then come back. But welcome. So I am with my lovely co-host Zaynab today, and we wanted to do a little stream to talk about all things sci-fi because we're both currently writing in the genre and both interested in the genre in general. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people where they can find you?
Yes, my name is Zaynab. I am a writer who mostly writes sci-fi, and you can mainly find me on Instagram.
Perfect.
Which I think is linked in the description.
Yeah, I'll put your Instagram in the description so people can find you there. That's literally the only link I've put in the description, so I hope that's fine. And I'm Malin, you're on my channel, and I recently, as of last year, started writing sci-fi as well. And we basically, I feel like the first time we talked privately was literally about, hey, we're both writing sci-fi, this is so fun. So this is going to be a bit of a, if you've been on the Troublemakers channels and seen sprints and shop talks, some, I think like once a month, Wellness does those. It's going to be a similar format in the sense that we're mostly going to be talking about this one topic, but then we'll jump into a couple of sprints here and there. So it won't be heavy sprinting, but a few here and there. So I've prepared some questions, but let's first just say hi to a couple of friends. Hi, Anna. How's it going? I like the little sci-fi emojis. This was me explaining to people, we'll be right there. We weren't late. We were only like 2 minutes late. I feel like that's fine. That's standard. And Lynn is also saying hi. How's it going? So I've got some banners created to talk through, and we can just do a couple, see how it's going in terms of your connection with your phone, because Zaynab is currently on a phone to make the camera work. If necessary, we can just do, like, if the connection's not good enough, we can always switch back to regular with no camera and just have the sound if that's easier, but we'll see. Whatever works best. So the first question that I had was, what works of fiction have been our inspiration in general for writing sci-fi? Because I think we're both writing space operas type of sci-fi. And I was wondering whether it's books, TV shows, movies, anything else, what sort of stuff has been the first inspiration?
Well, for me, it was two things. So there was a series called the Blood Race series by K.A. Emmons, and it actually started off as an urban fantasy, but then the last book took place 200 years after the second book, and I was so thrown off for a second. Actually ended up enjoying that book the most, and it was like, of course, like it was like set in the future, and it was, I don't know, like for some reason, like something clicked, and it was just so good. And then the second thing isn't really any pieces of sci-fi media. It was actually a class that I took. It was an environmental science class, and it was really funny because the whole objective of that class is to learn how learn how a system of Earth works.
Mm.
How humans impact it, and the third is to like find sustainable solutions. And I got the first two, but then when it came to the third one, I just exited out of that class like, I know how to destroy a fictional world. Yeah, my teacher would be so disappointed in me, but that's not the point. The point is like that, like a very specific lesson from that class actually led me to write my first complete my first novel, which was Sci-Fi. And that was like a huge milestone for me because because before that I had like 20 different projects that I never finished. Like after 2 months I would get bored, and like none of them were sci-fi. So you
That was
know,
the click you needed, was to
yeah,
switch to sci-fi instead in order to be like, I can
yeah,
finish the story.
yeah, maybe. Like I would get bored so easily, and like I wouldn't know why. And it wasn't until I wrote this sci-fi story that I was like, you know what, this just might be my thing.
I love that. I love that that was a journey of like, I've tried other genres first, but then the moment that I switched to this specific genre, suddenly I was like, yeah, this is it.
Yeah,
This is what I want to write.
yeah, it's crazy.
It's a bit of a calling, which I love. I personally did not study anything that made me inspired to write sci-fi. And so a lot of my sci-fi knowledge is very sci-fi fantasy based and a little bit more loose and not hard science at all, because when I was a student, probably one of the topics I was failing the most at was probably anything to do with science. I knew at a very young age science is not going to be for me, and yet I was still drawn to sci-fi. And I think, to me, when it comes to reading sci-fi more recently, I've been reading the Murderbot Diaries series by Martha Wells, which every single book in that series, it's novellas, and I think there's a couple novels, novel sizes books in there. But every single book in that series I have rated 5 stars. And I started reading it a little while ago, and I had no interest at the time in writing sci-fi whatsoever. But the more I started reading more books in sci-fi, the more I was like, oh, I could give that a go. Like there's a point where your brain goes, I could never write in this, until it goes, actually, maybe I could give it a go. And there's a lot of books that I used to read that were sci-fi that I would think I couldn't write in that specific style. Like I've really enjoyed the Project Hail Mary, which is by, I have it here, by Andy Weir. Oh, there we go. Let me grab this. That's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. It's the guy who wrote The Martian, like the Martian that became the movie with I forgot his name, very famous actor. Good job me. But when I read that one, I was like, this is hard science type of sci-fi. Like, although there's alien life in it, it's very, you could see it being so realistic. It's really well thought out. Everything is so detailed about how everything on the ship works. And you know that there's a lot of science and mathematics behind all the calculations and everything. And I could never write that type of sci-fi. So it's the moment that I realized, okay, there's more to sci-fi than just this subcategory, that I was like, I could get into it. So my inspiration's been mostly more light-hearted work and more things of the Star Wars genre, which is a little bit more fantasy in space rather than hard science, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually similar for me. Like I'm not too much on hard sci-fi. I'm also like more for like sci-fi fantasy, because like there are so many like scientific facts that I just do not know if they're accurate or not, and I'm just like, you know what? That's the fiction in science fiction.
Yeah. There's the part where you're just like, well, how do I fix this? And you're like, I can just make something up because it's fiction.
Right, exactly.
Literally. And then there's a second series I read more recently. I'm looking over because I took some notes of some of the books just to remember, because otherwise my brain just goes blank.
No, yeah, same here.
There's a series called The Consortium Rebellion by Jesse Mihalik. I'll put it in the comments. Consortium Rebellion by Jesse Mihalik. I'm not a very fast typer. There we go. So this is a series that I read a little while ago, and it brought me back to the sci-fi can be fun type of space, and not just serious and not just intense, and it's not all political stuff, and it's not all, like, there's an aspect of it that can be really fun. And this series in particular is very light-hearted in a way. Although there's a political background, it's not super developed, I would say. And it felt a lot like reading, you know, Regency romance types of books, but in space, because
Okay.
it has a lot to do with rich people and princesses type of things. And it really inspired me because the book that I wrote, the project title for ages was Space Princess, because I was like, I love that idea that it's essentially like Bridgerton vibes, but in space. And a lot more action and a lot more things like you would expect, you know, people shooting at each other in space and
Right.
blasting guns and things like that. So there's still that aspect. So it's a nice mix of everything.
That's
But
really.
yeah. Oh, I've lost you for a bit. Sorry.
Oops. Am I back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay.
So I've got a second question, which is sort of related to this one, which is, do you read or watch more sci-fi? And what was the first sci-fi piece of fiction that you remember reading, watching? That's sort of like, oh, when I was much younger, the first thing that I remember that was sci-fi that impacted me is this.
Well, I would say that I definitely watch more sci-fi than I read. And oh my god, the first sci-fi movie I remember watching is actually what kind of made me hate sci-fi in the beginning, because I actually used to hate sci-fi.
No,
It's really scary.
a true transformation.
Yes, I think the movie was Gravity, and I think it came out 2013. And
Right. Yeah, with is that with Sandra Bullock or
I'm not sure who the actors and
no?
actresses were, but it was the one where I think like something happened on the space station and they had to like survive to make it back to Earth or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Reading it.
traumatized me. That honestly slightly traumatized me. And yeah, and like because of that, I kind of like was scared of sci-fi in a sense. And for some reason I used to think that sci-fi was only space and aliens. And I just like space and aliens was just not my thing. In fact, like space opera, like at the time also was just not my thing. And now I'm kind of writing one, which is like super ironic.
I
But
love that.
yeah.
You did a full
Full,
180. Yeah. Um, I also feel like when we say sci-fi, people will immediately have a direct, I'm thinking of this subgenre rather than I'm thinking of the overarching genre,
yeah.
because you have a lot more in sci-fi than just space, aliens, etc. Like post-apocalyptic TV shows and books and movies like Hunger Games is science fiction, for
Right.
instance. But people don't think about that because you would essentially say, it's a post-apocalyptic or like it's a dystopia, and then you'd be like, that's a subgenre of sci-fi, but you immediately know what we're talking about.
Right.
Similarly with, I think when it comes to zombie movies in general, if they have a scientific explanation instead of a fantasy explanation, then it's considered sci-fi.
Right. Yeah, sci-fi is like such a broad genre, and like I did not realize that at the time. Like I once did like a Google search of like how many different subgenres are in sci-fi, and there were like I think like over 50, and I was like so shocked. It,
There's
it was
so many.
there were so many. It was like a game changer for me.
I think I wrote it down because I wanted to be able to address if we talk about sci-fi in general, what the subgenres are, because we're specifically drawn in our writings towards space opera, but you
Mhm.
can think of, yeah, hard science fiction like Project Hail Mary and The Martian, military science fiction, cyberpunk, steampunk, biopunk, all of the punks,
Yes.
all of the sci-fi.
There's so many
Um, I
of
like
them.
that there's also alternate history and alternate reality is technically science fiction. And so science fiction is not automatically in the future. It could just be in the present, but a different present. That's sci-fi.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
There's so many more, but yeah, I kind of love that. When For me, I think I'm currently reading more sci-fi, but that's been a recent switch. And I realized this last year when I was doing my review of all the books I've read in Goodreads and everything. I had started reading a lot more sci-fi, probably because I started writing
Right.
a sci-fi novel. But before that, I would have said watching more. And I think my main, like the one that would have impacted me the most, the first one that I remember the most is The Fifth Element with Bruce Willis, and it's quite old now. When is it? When is it from? It's very old.
Yeah, I have not heard of it.
So The Fifth Element is from '97, so that
Oh,
is very old. It's Mila Jovovich and Bruce Willis in it, and it's to this day still one of my favorite movies. Like I have maybe a top three, and it's in the top three forever. Like it will never budge from that.
wow.
So I think like the what I loved the most about it was that it was sci-fi, it was action adventure. There's aliens, there's like, you know, so much space travel and everything, but there's an element of romance, and it's the same ratio as The Mummy. It's the same ratio of action and romance plot. So you have like maybe 20% of romance, and the rest is about the romance. And I think about the action. And I think that's what I love the most about it was the nice combination of the two.
Like the
Um,
balance.
yeah, and then the second thing as well, and I think what's impacted me a lot in my writing as well is the the vision of a futuristic version of Earth, which I really love in depicted in the movie, where at some point he's driving a taxi and like at some point he goes under the fog, and you realize, okay, the whole city is dead under the fog and everyone lives in the upper floors of buildings. And that kind of detail, I love
So cool.
exploring this kind of, oh, in the future, is that how we're gonna live? So yeah, that's probably the first one. I've got some answers as well in the chat. So Anna said, I have no idea of the title, but my first piece of sci-fi media was a middle grade dystopia where people got barcode tattoos and the MC went on the run. It did give a scary feel. I love that. I feel like also similarly to Anna wrote a sci-fi book, a dystopia book was one of her first books ever, which she read as a celebration of her 1,000 followers on on YouTube. So that was quite fun. And Lynn said, I watch more sci-fi than I read because I do find some sci-fi books have so much world building that I get confused, similar to when I read high fantasy. Watching sci-fi is easier to digest. That's true.
that.
Well, that's a good point because I feel like when you watch sci-fi, you get overwhelmed with like your other senses. So there's a lot to look at to understand the world that you're in, and you don't need as much exposition
Right.
as when you're reading sci-fi. And I think that's one of the challenges of writing sci-fi is making the world building intrinsic to the story.
Yes, definitely.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I've never thought of those post-apocalyptic as sci-fi. Yeah. Would that mean Dark Angel was sci-fi? I have so many memories watching that and Farscape and Andromeda and Roswell. Yeah. I never watched Dark Angel, but I know of it. So like I remember it being a thing and I never watched it. And I thought it was sci-fi, but I don't know. I don't know. Anna says, I read so many futuristic dystopias growing up. Now that I think about it, no wonder I tried to write one. Yeah. Yeah, because you had what was it called? The Maze Runner as well. So there was the Hunger Games and then the Maze Runner, and I think there were a few Divergent, and these were the big three that I can think of.
Yes. I read the first book of Hunger Games. I read the first book of Divergent, and I think I read like the first half of Maze Runner. For some reason, I don't know. I don't know. For some reason, I just couldn't finish them. I don't know why.
It feels like there's this is something I haven't put in my questions, but there's something interesting about when post-apocalyptic worlds and dystopias become a trend again is usually like we should be seeing a resurgence of that right now because the economy is in complete crisis. And it's usually linked to that, and it's usually linked to how the world is doing economically. So I feel like all of these books came out around like the 2008 crisis. I might be wrong, and you know, don't quote me on that. I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I read all of the books in the Hunger Games trilogy, and I remember reading. I think I read all of the Maze Runner books as well, but I don't have a lot of memories of the like. I only remember the first one. I feel like maybe because there was a movie, and so maybe like that reinforced my memory of it. And
Mhm.
then Divergent, I read the first book, and then I couldn't get into it because I thought the characters were very flat and very like there was a trend to write main characters as blank slates so that as a teenage girl you could project yourself as that character because she didn't have too many traits of personality.
Wow, I had no idea.
I feel like there was a time when people authors would do that a bit more, and I'd be like, what does she like? What is she like? I don't know. Give me something to work with.
Oh my god.
I'm being very judgmental of these books, but I did like the Hunger Games. Oh yeah, the Fifth Wave and the Darkest Minds also come to mind. I don't think I ever read those. Um,
Yeah, I read the Fifth Wave. I read the second book of the Fifth Wave, which I think was the Infinite Sea. For some reason, I did not get to the last one. and and then okay, for once, I did read all three books of the Darkest Minds trilogy. I enjoyed that trilogy.
which one is the Darkest Minds? Is it by a famous author, or
Um,
I don't remember?
it's by Alexandra Bracken, and oh yeah, and they also made a movie for the first book, but it was okay.
Didn't like not do all that well.
Yeah.
Typical.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised.
Fair enough. But yeah, I feel like to me, I know that it's such an old movie, but The Fifth Element was probably my most impactful memory of like sci-fi. And it's a space opera. Like it's the essence of a space opera. Like there's so much going on, so many like planets and beings, and I don't know how to explain it, but
Mhm.
because when you look up the definition of space opera, um, I'm gonna do that now. It says it's a subgenre of science fiction that emphasizes space warfare with use of melodramatic, risk-taking space adventures, relationships, and chivalric romance. I love that. And I think that qualifies. Should
Yeah.
we do one more question in my little list, and then we can jump into a sprint? Where
Let's
are my questions? So this sort of touches upon what we were saying about the subgenres. What sort of sci-fi do you gravitate towards? And I had as examples, because I feel like these are the most polarized between the two examples. Are you more into hard science like The Martian and all of these very sciencey type of sci-fi where it's very explained, or more into fantasy sci-fi such as Star Wars is very much a fantasy in space, like they have swords and magic, but it's in space.
Yeah, I would say I definitely gravitate more towards soft sci-fi because I think that's also what Project Orbit is in a sense.
Yeah.
Um, and also now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think Project Orbit is actually space opera because I don't think because most of the scenes take place on the planets themselves. Like
Mm.
there are maybe like two or three scenes that are actually in space. So yeah, that was like a random digression, but
But do you have like do your characters travel and then they're on a different planet, or oh cat?
yes they do. So basically, like book one takes place on like the first planet, and then book two takes place on a different planet, and
Okay.
then he's kind of like a mixture.
I feel like that could qualify as space opera because I feel like in my head, when I picture a space opera, I think of it doesn't need to be you're constantly traveling in space on a spaceship, but it
Mhm.
can be you know that the world is expensive. You know that the universe is expensive and that there are other planets and that your characters can travel to those. And
Right.
it's just that knowledge in the background of the world building. I feel
Mhm.
like that's sometimes enough to make you feel like it's a space opera.
Oh, then it could be.
Yeah, I think I'm more like you as well. Although I enjoy reading hard sci-fi books sometimes, and sometimes watching hard sci-fi content that's more like explain with proper science terms. I feel
Mhm.
like probably I find it more fun when there's a bit of magic thrown in and explanations make absolutely no sense. And it's just like, yep, this is the fiction part of science fiction.
Yeah.
I see there's some more people that have arrived. I love that Wallace forgot to log off the Blank Page Tavern, which if anyone watching doesn't know, there's a new channel you can go follow called the Blank Page Tavern, which is a D&D channel where writers play Dungeons and Dragons. And the first episode aired, like it's an episode on TV. It aired today, literally finished 30 minutes before we started this stream. But hi, Wallace, how's it going? And hello, Emma, how are you? Thank you very much for booping the like button. So yeah, we're just in the middle of talking about all things sci-fi, and I've prepared a bunch of questions. So we're currently just talking about the subgenres. And actually, because you said something about your environmental class, do you ever read or have you ever read something that's more like eco fiction, you know, like more towards ecological, like disasters or things like that?
I can't say I have. I mean, okay, in a sense, like that last book that took place like 200 years later, kind of, I would say it was a little bit because like there were parts of like the forest that were like kind of burned down, and the characters were kind of trying to revive those trees. So
it's a bit, there's a hint of it. Yeah. And I quite like, I haven't read this book specifically. I'm just trying, oh, there we go. This is a sci-fi book I quite enjoyed by Jeff Vandermeer, and he wrote Annihilation, which became like a movie on Netflix with Natalie Portman, which the trilogy is great, and I think I prefer the books to the Netflix version. But he writes a lot of, I want to say, weird sci-fi with hints of ecological disaster in the background. And Born, it happens in a world where so many things have died, and it's sort of like the aftermath of an ecological like disaster. So there's a bit of, this was interesting because it doesn't focus solely on it, and I think I enjoy it when it's more like in the background as like the reason for certain things to have happened, because as humans living in the present, you can sort of see some of these things going in that direction. Not to make light of it, but you know. So I like when there's some realistic explanations for certain things, but it doesn't have to be hard science all the time. Like I like when there's a balance between the two.
Yes, I have to agree. I like the balance too. I don't like it when it's like too much focus on the world building and the characters are kind of put to the side.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Because I think I gravitate more towards character-driven stories in science fiction rather than purely the world. Is like, because sometimes in science fiction, the world, the universe that they inhabit becomes a character in itself. And
oh wow.
It's interesting, but it's just not the genre that I gravitate towards. Like for instance, we're talking about zombie movies and TV shows recently with a friend, and I recently watched Happiness, which I cannot shut up about. Like I will talk. Did you enjoy it?
I did like it.
I loved it. I'm so happy that you did. I freaking loved it. And I think the reason I loved it was because although there are zombies, you have them like there's 1 or 2 per episode the whole time. You don't have more than that because it's focused more on that group of people who live in a building block of apartments for like a gated block of apartments. And it's about how they react to the crisis that's happening with the zombies. And so it's about, you know, the upper floors are considering themselves superior to the people who live in the lower floors, etc. And it's how that impacts how they react to a crisis. And I find that fascinating. It's a lot more fun to watch. But yeah. There's a few comments related to this question. I definitely read more fantasy sci-fi because I read a lot of fantasy. So the fantasy sci-fi books let me dip a toe into the sci-fi pool. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like also people who read high fantasy or epic fantasy are more used to the heavy world building and a lot of time spent talking about the universe and like how it works. And Anna says, I think Dune taught me that science fiction is really interesting to me, can still have elements of magic. Yeah. Dune is considered by a lot of people as the blueprint for Star Wars. It has, I mean, Frank Herbert considered that George Lucas has pretty much ripped off Dune to make Star
Oh,
Wars. So it makes sense. And I sort of agree, having read Dune and watched the two movies. Yeah.
oh,
Did you?
you've read.
Yeah, I read the book. I have it. I feel like I love having my bookshelf there and be like, this.
Actually, yeah, my beta reader actually was recommending that I read Dune as maybe a comp title for Project Orbit. So
Oh, interesting.
I still
Here's what I
consider.
would recommend is it's a big book, and I would recommend doing half audiobook if you like, because I mostly did the audiobook format, and I think it helped me get through it a lot more. Like a lot of people were like, it's so complicated, it's really hard to read. And I didn't feel like it was, but I read a lot of it through audio format. So yes, it's my pride and joy. Thank you very much. I do love the special edition.
Yes.
It's so pretty and it's got the sprayed edges and everything. Oh, and also when you open it, underneath it says fear is the mind killer,
Whoa.
which is pretty damn cool.
So cool.
I was like, if I'm gonna own this book, I'm gonna own the best version of it. But
Should.
yeah, Wallace agrees. Yeah, to me, Dune and Star Wars are fantasy novels wearing a sci-fi costume, which I don't think there's anything wrong with being called sci-fi just because it happens in space with, a bit of science as well, or more thinking about space travel and everything is a genre of sci-fi. I think I enjoy that genre, but yeah. For something to feel sci-fi to me, it has really dealt specifically with it has to deal specifically with humanity's relationship to scientific concepts and technology. Interesting. I like that. Yeah. It's an interesting definition of it.
Wait,
Um, mm?
that would fall into some subgenre of sci-fi. It's just not coming to me right now.
Yeah, to do with more concept, because I've got my list of subgenre,
Maybe
but
punks in a way.
I think
It's like
it's just that the term is just so vague and so large that it can encompass so much. But if you think about it, First Contact and Alien stories are sci-fi, but a lot of the time they're very fantasy-like. Like you could never think of aliens as this is fantasy. It's very much sci-fi. It's people you meet on another planet in space.
Right.
However, I don't feel like it has anything to do specifically, like it wouldn't really have anything to do with humanity's relationship to technology or anything of the sort. Like it can, but sometimes it's treated like a fantasy topic and more like a fantasy race, like elves and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
That Annihilation movie was weird. I remember watching that when it came out. I would recommend the books more because you understand a bit more of what's going on in the books, and at the same time, I feel like the movie stopped after book one, and there's a lot more. Like the books follow each other, so you want to read all of them. So it was a bit of a shame that they only did one movie. It's still good, but I just don't have much memory of it, and I remember the books more vividly. So I don't know. I've read through Children of Dune, can't bring myself to face God Emperor. Which one is God Emperor? I've only read the first Dune book, and then in my head I was like, I might read Messiah, which I think is the second one, if Denis Villeneuve does a third movie, because it will be based off Messiah, I'm assuming. But I'm not even sure that I want to plunge back into it. And while this agrees, I recommend audiobook for sure. It's got a full cast, so good. Yeah, it's really well done. So pretty, yes. Also, me calling Star Wars a novel, yeah, I did not even question that, and it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon for me, so God Emperor is the one where he turns into a worm. Yeah, okay, yeah, I do know. Yeah. I don't want to give spoilers, but also it's sort of hilarious. Hello, Kitty.
Yes. He is. I don't know what it means. I gave you food.
But yeah, I've got 10 questions in total. So obviously we're going through them, I think, fast enough, so we're good. I'm just gonna leave the fourth one here, and then we're gonna jump into a sprint before we answer it. And I feel like maybe 20 minutes or less. What sort of length are we thinking sprint wise?
Mm, I'm cool. I'm cool with the 20 or 25.
Okay, perfect. So the question, if anyone in the chat also wants to answer, is what is your favorite recent sci-fi piece of work? Whether it's movies, TV shows, books, video games, whatever it is, if you have a favorite recent one, I'm going to take notes because I want all the recommendations. And two, I just find it interesting because you sort of explore again all the different subgenres of sci-fi when looking at what's out there. So yeah. Let me prep an actual timer that would be useful. And I prepped all of Laura Nettle's Aurora Borealis timers because they made me think sci-fi.
Nice.
uh, Perfect. I think it's prepped. And now I just need to share it and manage to do that. That would be great. Present. Share screen. It always takes me a minute to remember how to do this. I won't share the audio. There we go. Full screen. That
Oh,
seems to be working. Okay, I will get us started in 3, 2, 1. I'm still on mute. For a second, I was like, and we're done. And I was like, I did not unmute myself. How was that sprint for you? What were you doing? I didn't even ask what you were, if you were going to work on Project Orbit or.
Yeah, I'm actually working on some revisions for Project Orbit, and I've reached a chapter that needs a lot of work. Like I think I may have to go back to my zero draft version of the scene because the current version is just not working.
Oh, but sometimes that's good that you've got several versions to work with then, and maybe it just needs a bit of a threading between the two.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna like try to find a way to like combine those two versions.
Yeah. And it's also like, I don't know about you, but I find revisions so difficult. Like, I much prefer drafting than revising.
Yeah, I definitely find drafting more fun.
I was just like, I don't want to look at the mess I left myself, please. But yeah, I managed to walk the dog and feed him. Like, he just needs a very quick evening walk. And then he tried to jump on me several times because I don't know, I think because my partner's gone right now for the day, so he gets really more restless when there's only one of us at home, and so he's a lot more like needy.
That makes
And then I managed to write a tiny, tiny bit. Like I came back and I wrote for like the last 5 minutes or something. So I wrote 40 words and that's it.
nice.
But yeah. So we do have this question on screen, which I had put up before, which is, do you have a favorite recent sci-fi piece of work, whether it's movies, TV shows, books, video games, etc., whatever it is?
So the show itself is not recent, but I watched it recently, and it was Firefly.
Ah, I love Firefly.
I can't believe they did not have a second season.
No, but have you watched the movie?
I have Serenity, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember because I actually watched that movie a while ago. I
So,
watched
funnily enough, I watched the movie before I watched anything from the TV show because I knew of them. I don't know why I knew of the movie before the TV show, but and you can technically, and I think I watched it with other people who had never watched the TV show either, and it can stand as like a standalone, which I find very interesting that they managed to do that. And I love the movie is like a great amount of action versus I don't know. There's like a tiny sub romantic plot, and everything else is action and plot, and I really enjoy that.
Oh, I don't remember much from the movie, so I'll definitely need to rewatch that. But like, oh my god, I love like the action and the humor in Firefly. Like it was just so good. It was such
Yeah.
an show that was and like it was basically space opera, right?
Yeah, I feel like it is. I feel like that counts as space opera. Again, I feel like the definition of space opera is a bit loose, and I don't always know, but yes, Lynn agrees. Yes
Yeah.
to Firefly. I just love Nathan Fillion as an actor as well, who is the main character. And I used to be obsessed with Castle, which is like an old crime show where he's the main character as well.
I watched Castle too.
Did you? Yeah, I loved it. And it was mostly because I really like him as an actor, I think. But um, I'm gonna try to answer my own question with again, I was like, I need to remember what I've watched or read recently. And actually, let me pull another book from my shelf. My most recent probably is Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. And it's essentially it's a horror book in space with the background is the premise is similar to the Titanic, but in space. So it's like a really big luxury ship that disappeared a long time ago and had like a similar catastrophe happening to it and had so many really wealthy people on board, famous people on board, etc. And years ago that happened. And the characters in this book get a signal of distress like a really old one that's been left on from that ship. And so they find the ship. They decide to go on board because it's famously has a lot of expensive stuff on board, like gold and faucets and stuff, like, you know, like things that they're like, we could loot this and make money from it. But there's horrific things on board and it becomes like a horror movie type of thing. Super fun. Sorry?
Oh yeah, I was just saying. I was just saying that it sounds fun.
Yeah, it was very fun. And my favorite thing about this book, and the thing that I keep going back to, is there's a subplot of romance in it. And it does not take over the book at all. It's really not the main plot whatsoever. It's sort of like very much in the background, but I love it because it gives that slow burn feeling of you don't really know whether it's going to happen, but you feel the chemistry between the characters and you're like, it could go in that direction, or she could leave it alone and it wouldn't happen. And then it does, and it's just like, yes, there's a bit of romance in this overarching. Like, I love that.
Yes, I love romance as a subgenre. I'm not a huge fan when romance is the main plot.
Yeah.
But yes, I love it when there's like a romantic subplot in books, like any genre.
Yeah. And I love when it's like, I don't mind when the percentage of it is a bit higher, but I keep always referring to The Mummy as the blueprint for me, because in The Mummy, you know the romance is important. You want these two characters to get together and you know it's part of the main plot, but it isn't the main plot. It's like under 50%. And then the rest of the movie is like to do with the mummy and their search for the city. Like, it's everything else is still more important, but the romance is still there. And I think that's just that, I don't know, that balance that I love. But to find, I'm trying to think about like anything else that's quite recent. Thing is, and similarly to you, it's not super recent, although it's still ongoing, but season 1 is not recent. I restarted watching The Expanse recently, and it is on Prime Video, and I believe it's based off a series of books. And it is very, I don't know if I would count it as space opera, but there's a lot of ship traveling and planet hopping and like going between worlds. It has a very important political plot. Like, I'd say that's probably the most important part of the series. But you do follow one specific crew on a ship that sort of starts off as, we don't have a choice but to be we're the only people alive left and who care about this, etc. And I love that it builds up on the relationship between them, and it has such a found family trope in it. I think that's my favorite thing about it. It's not so much the political subplot, it's not so much like everything that they do, but to me, it's the found family bit where they become a stronger crew as you go further in the series.
Yes, I love that. I love the found family concept. I love that. And also when you mentioned Prime, I just remembered there's a show called The Peripheral on Amazon Prime too, and it's also sci-fi. It's kind of hard to explain without spoiling it, but it's with like video game and virtual reality kind of thing to do with the future. I cannot say more than that.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of TV shows and movies at the moment that have more to do with like video games and VR and things like that. So I don't really know how it's going to go, but I know that, is it Netflix or I can't remember, one of the big names is getting out The Three Body Problem, which is, I think it's originally a Chinese book. Three Body Problem. It was written by, I am gonna butcher this, Liu Cixin. I don't know how to pronounce this. I will type it in the comment. That's much better. There we go. And I remember reading this, and all I remember is that it has something to do with VR video game. Like, people put a headset on and are plunged into this video game. And I remember almost nothing else about it. And so I watched the trailer. I was like, I don't know what happens in it, even though I read the book. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that because it's coming out, I think, really soon.
Ooh.
On Netflix. Yeah, it's Netflix apparently.
I'll
Cool.
look out for that. And
Um,
speaking of video games, I also really love playing Halo.
yeah, there's a
Yeah,
TV show as well
yeah,
now.
yeah. There is a TV show. I think the second season is airing right now, and
Mm.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think the TV show takes place before the video game because
Oh, interesting.
yeah, because like the characters don't even know what the Halo is right now,
Yeah.
and in the video game they do. So
So it's like a prequel to what
yeah.
happens in the video games. That's interesting. I've never played them, the video games, but I remember watching my husband play a lot of Fallout, and that's another post-apocalyptic one, which is interesting because it's sort of, I think it happens like the apocalypse happens in like the 50s or something like that, and then you have the post-apocalyptic world afterwards, but everything is sort of 50s themed, which was fun. And they're coming out with a TV show for this as well, really soon. I think on Prime. I think. But yeah, there's a Lynn agrees that The Expanse was really good. Haven't read the books. I haven't read the books either. I don't know if I will because this is very sexist of me, but I don't read a lot of books written by men because I tend to be annoyed very easily. Which is not entirely true, sci-fi wise. I have read quite a few written by men, but I don't know. I'm difficult about it. Agents of Shield is my current obsession, and it gets more sci-fi as it goes on. Its found family trope in season 1 is also what hooked me. Yeah, I know that I've watched a few episodes, but I think maybe I've been over the superhero thing for a little while now, and I'm not really into it anymore. Like I'm just a bit bored of all the Marvel stuff. I don't know. They overdid it, and now I'm bored of it.
Yeah.
But Wallace agrees, was obsessed with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. during its first season, and says she feels betrayed by that ending, though it took me a long time to recover. I don't actually don't know what happens. But typical of TV shows and why it's hard to get attached to one at the moment, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shame. And Lynn says the Silo is post-apocalyptic and was awesome, and that's also based on books, which I know I own the first book, or I don't know whether there's even more than one, but I own a book called Silo, which I know is based off, and I've never read it. I just have it on my Kindle. And Lynn says the end of season 1 of Agents of this is Agents of Shield, yeah, that I was talking about. That's when my fanfic starts, and I rewrote the ending. Yes, I love that fanfiction is there to fix the mistakes of writers everywhere.
Yeah, and I still haven't gone to read the fanfiction. I will, Lynn. I will.
But I think Lynn said that it was doing really well as well, and that people are really loving it. So that's fantastic. And yeah, ending to first season. I never finished the show. Okay, fair enough. Hello, MTM. How are you? How's it going? And well, it says, yeah, exactly. That shit needed to be fixed. Fair. Fair. What different preface and acknowledgement? I'm not sure what you're talking about. If you could specify what you mean, that would be helpful. We're currently talking about sci-fi, and our current question is, what is your favorite recent sci-fi piece of work, whether it's movies, TV shows, books, etc. And yeah, I think we've covered, unless there's more that I can think of, but we've covered all of that I can think about. But yeah, I'm excited for the Fallout TV show because I liked watching the playthrough of the video game. And I like that post-apocalyptic worlds are doing a comeback. Like, I think that'll be interesting. So this next set of questions is a little bit more geared towards our own work. So we've talked about sci-fi in general, or inspiration, what we've enjoyed. And now let's talk about what we're working on. So the first question being, can you talk a little bit about your own sci-fi work? Do you have like an elevator pitch for it, or just, in a few sentences? You don't have to have a elevator pitch version, and the sort of worlds that it's built in, etc.
So I have like 2 sci-fi projects currently. The first one is Project Orbit, and that is where it takes place in a solar system with 3 different planets. And I have 3 main characters, and each of them are from each of those planets. And it's kind of like I know it's kind of a high concept. I would say this is probably like my most high concept story, because the first book is kind of like the planet that it takes place on has more of a solar punk thing, and then another planet is like the complete opposite. It goes into cyberpunk, so it's like a lot of whiplash, but like
I kind of love that, because then you get to explore more different drawers depending on which planet they're on,
yeah,
and that's quite fun in
yeah,
itself.
yeah. And so like, and like the way the planets are kind of, I mean like the planet's characteristics kind of dictated like why this planet is solar punk, and why this planet inhibits more of a cyberpunk concept.
Interesting.
And then I have my second project, which is Project Unity, which I have not really like officially announced or anything, but
Is this the official announcement right
yeah,
now?
but it's definitely still in the brainstorming stage. Though, like I'm still trying to world build it and everything, but it's, I don't know. I would say, I don't know. Is alternate future a subgenre?
I guess yes. I mean, I feel like it should be. I feel like there's so many subgenres.
Right. Well, now it is.
No,
So
it is.
yeah, I would say it's like an alternate future, because the world's history is similar to our world history, but then
Mm.
at some point in the timeline, it diverges somewhere else.
Interesting. As in, like, it diverges somewhere in the present or in the past to become a different future, or it diverges in the future from where we are now?
It diverges from, I would say somewhere in the past, I
Okay.
think. I'm still brainstorming.
But I love that. I love that as a concept. And is Project Orbit a trilogy, or is it planned as
Yeah, Project Orbit is a trilogy, and I'm planning for Project Unity to be a duology. We'll see.
nice? Nice. And if anyone is interested, because I love that you did that, go check Zaynab's Instagram link in the description, because you've posted a few reels and stories that have like more about the world building and like sort of imagery that relates to each of the planets and stuff, which I love. I think that's a great idea.
You. Those are really fun to make.
But it's like it makes you excited because you get a feel for it, like a proper feel for it, without needing the world building to be read immediately. Like you can just see and be like, oh, this is what it's going to be in.
Right.
And currently I'm working on, I've decided to name it Starcatcher at the moment. It might change because I am
Wait,
very, sorry.
for Space Princess?
Yeah. So because Space Princess Project in my head is several standalones, and I see it as each standalone will have a different couple that I'll focus on and a bit of a romance in that within that couple, but it will have a continuity when it comes to the background, like the world building, the political plot behind the scene, etc. So the actual plot and everything that's going on with the politics of it will be continuous and have more than in book one. It will, be continued by what happens at the end of it. It will impact book two, etc. But each main story will be contained as standalone for each book. And so I really wanted each book to be called with a formula, like having a similar title for each book. So for instance, Starcatcher, and then it could be, I don't know, like Space Voyager, but like each book will have a similar type of title. So currently the first one is called Starcatcher, and I don't know if it'll change. I might change my mind about it. But it is a space opera romance with a fated mate trope. And my main character, Orion, is a sort of space princess, hence the project title, Space Princess, because she is the daughter and heir to one of the big houses that rule the galaxy where we're in. And she is matched through like some sort of genetic engineering process to another man who they have to they basically belong to a similar, a house. They have to be like of the same status, except that he's not, and he's the most wanted criminal in the entire galaxy. So she has to go on the run.
I love that. That is such a cool.
That's the premise, and that's sort of how it starts. And she's on the run with her best friend, who is an android robot. So it's very and like you get a dual POV. So this was my first time doing a dual POV and having the POV from the male love interest, but he is also part of a bigger crew, so there's a little bit as well of that found family trope within his crew on his ship, etc. And there's a lot of space station visiting, planet hopping, being on the run on a ship, etc. So there's that aspect that makes it, I think, a space opera. And yeah, I'm enjoying writing it at the moment, but it's hard to make an elevator pitch for it as well, even though I am the one who asked that question. I was like, how do I summarize this?
Oh my god, I cannot wait to get my hands on this book.
I'm really excited to get it finished because and this is actually probably my second. No, I have a question somewhere. Oh, this is linked to it. What has worked great? What have you loved? What has been particularly challenging? But the question is sort of following from where are we at in the process of writing this? So currently with Space Princess / Starcatcher, I'm how many words do I have? So many. I have 113,000 words currently, and it's not finished, but there's a lot of world building, okay? And
Right. Also,
and I'm very close to the end. I have like maybe 7 chapters or beat in Act 3 to finish before being closed, before finishing.
also, you consider yourself an overwriter, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think I tend to write everything that's in my brain just so it's on the page and then be like, okay, I can cull this and delete passages that are useless. And I can always keep them somewhere else, but I think I prefer to work that way. And that might be because I have the problem of I'm a victim of toxic productivity in some ways. I'd be like, word counts, that's what matters. And all of these events that push you to write more words, I'm into it. And it's not always healthy, but yeah.
Yeah,
Where are you at with are you currently doing Project Orbit revisions, right?
I'm currently doing revisions for book 1, and I have book 2 drafted.
Like the entirety of book 2 drafted, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
You
Is your draft of book 2 impacting a lot of your revisions of book 1? Have you changed quite a few things after you finished drafting book 2?
Yes, some things, because in book 2, some of my side characters get a little bit more developed. So in book 1, I have to go back and kind of make that consistent with how they act in book 2.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the main thing.
Fair. Yeah. So it's not too much plot that needs to change drastically.
Not so much plot.
Good. I'm just going to quickly go through the comments and then we can answer this question just because there were a couple. I get it, well as saying not loving that post-apocalypse is a trend right now. I understand specifically for you, Alice, but also I feel like as long as it's completely unrealistic, like Fallout is based on the fact that the apocalypse would have happened in the 1950s, which is long ago. Therefore, it doesn't feel like that could happen anymore. So I'm okay with that one, if that makes sense. Anna says, I admire you so much for world building, not just one world, but multiple planets. I feel like that is definitely one of the challenges, isn't it?
Yeah, because this was my first time not really world building, but solar system building, and it was actually so much fun. Like I wasn't, like, I mean, yeah, it was, it had its difficulties, but I felt like it was more fun than it was challenging.
Yeah. I think so too. Like I had a lot of fun doing the world building part, and I don't know at which point in the process you worked on your world building, but it sort of relates as well to this question, like what have I loved? I have loved doing the world building because I did it all before writing, and I spent like a month. It was like in December, I remember being like, I can't write right now because I had just finished writing another book and I was like, I need to not write. I need to take a proper break. Or otherwise I'm going to be in a slump. And so instead, I spent the whole month just doing world building and forcing myself not to write a single word of manuscript. And when I started writing, I was so hyped because I was like, I've got everything. I know what's going to happen. Like I have this planet and this system, and it made it so much more fun to me.
Yes. Yeah, I think, for Project Orbit, the thing is, I'm not not like completely done world building. So like I world build as much as I need to know before I start the draft, and then as
Yeah.
I'll come across things that I'm like, okay, I need to world build this now, and then I need to world build this. And remember how I said something like each book takes place on a different planet.
Yeah.
So I didn't really world build the second planet until I had to start drafting book two.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I haven't really figured out the third planet yet either.
But like, did your characters that you were working with know what, like, had they already been to those planets, slash, did they know what the world building would be themselves? And then you
Yeah.
had to go back and implement that.
Okay, so basically what I did was I figured out as much as I needed to know of each planet. And then once I get like to the book where
Mm,
it takes on that planet, that's when I figure out the rest of the details.
fair. Um, and I feel like the world building part is probably the most intimidating part, which is why a lot of people are like, "Oh my god, I admire you when you're doing world building." But in a sense, when you start doing it, I feel like it's the most fun. Like
It,
I had a lot of fun, and it's not just figuring things out like what are the names of locations and what's the people culture there. It's also things like, I mean, I invented three different psychological diseases linked to space, genetic engineering, things like that. Like, for instance, a big part of the book is that they're worried the villain has POD, which is personally, I can't even remember what it stands for. I'm like, what did I call it? Because I have it open in my world building. Personality override disorder, because essentially they use some drugs that allow to make your brain like when you were young, so bring back the neuroplasticity of having a young person brain so that you can learn new skills more easily, because when you're young you can learn skills more easily. But because of that, then they have to re-implement characteristics of your current adult brain afterwards, and it's so it overwrites on top of your brain, and so people who have done it too many times become psychopath. And
whoa.
so like, and that's so fun to invent that kind of stuff, to be like, that's part of the world building. It's not just here's a planet, it's also here's a new religion, here's what they believe in, and like, I don't know.
Oh my god, as a psychology major, I am very intrigued.
I won't lie, I probably made up so much stuff that makes no sense in the real world. But yeah, has there been stuff that you find particularly challenging writing sci-fi specifically?
I would say like trying to figure out if like something that I put if something that I come up with like makes logical sense,
Yeah.
because like sometimes when I try to Google just sometimes isn't that helpful. So what I'll do is that like I'll ask ChatGPT like either very specific questions or very theoretical questions that I would frame in a certain way, being like within the context of this fictional concept, would this logically make
Yeah.
sense? And
I love that you're mentioning that, because I have been using ChatGPT so much specifically for writing sci-fi compared to any other books that I've been writing in. ChatGPT has been so helpful for this because I've been able to ask questions. So, for instance, at some point I was like, there's a version of the internet in my world, but what is it? Like, and I wanted it to sound realistic and to be realistic as an evolution of what we would have done as humans. So I was asking ChatGPT what would be, I can't remember what the question was exactly, but something along the lines of what will be the internet looking like in however many thousand years, and what would it have evolved to be. And so like sort of use that as a basis to help myself create like the internet of the future, I guess. But yeah, I feel like I agree with you that making things sound realistic, while obviously we can invent things and it's still fiction, we still want things to be realistic in a certain sense. But also for me, it's naming things in a way that's not
yeah,
cringe.
yeah. Oh my god. Half the time in my document I will just have like place name in a bracket highlighted, and then I'll
Oh my
take
god.
and copy it into my document so I can later like Control F and find it.
Yes,
And
because I have renamed certain things so many times that I'm like, there are 3 different versions of this specific item.
yes.
And like at some point, I made up these plastic handcuffs that are made of like an impossible to destroy plastic. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna call them Dynapoly or something like that. And just, you know, the kind of dumb things you're like, does this sound okay? Or does this sound like a 12-year-old wrote this? So yeah, I find naming things quite challenging. I'm just gonna quickly look at Lynn's comment that is asking, have you watched Loki with the alternate timelines? It might help you brainstorm for Project Unity.
Ooh, I have not.
I really enjoy Loki, but I've not watched the second season yet. But the first season was really fun, I found. And I know that I said, and I think you were agreeing with me, that we're sort of done with superhero stuff, but and it is Marvel universe based, but it feels different from the rest. It doesn't feel like a superhero movie vibe. So
I see. Okay.
it's still, and I would continue watching it without watching anything else to do with the superheroes, basically, because I feel like it's separate. And Laura says, hi, hello, how's it going? Welcome to the discussion. We're currently talking about what's worked, what hasn't worked, or been challenging for writing sci-fi. But I think we've sort of answered everything about this. So I can move on to the next question, which is, what sort of process did you go through to prep for writing sci-fi? Like when did you decide, I'm going to write the sci-fi book, I have this idea, and did you go through any process, or did you just plunge straight into it and pantsed your way through it?
So for me, whenever I get a new idea, it's always the world, like a concept of the world that always comes to me first. Like not even characters, just the world. And so then I'll basically come up with this concept. It'll be like a very broad concept, because what happens is that I think very broad and then I have to narrow it down. So then after I come up with that world concept, that's when I basically change gears and I ask myself, like, what type of characters would live in this world?
I love that.
Yeah, and then I'll try to focus on building the characters and figuring out what themes I want to communicate through this piece, and then I'll go back to the world building and world build the rest of it accordingly. That's kind of what it is. It's like initial world building, character, rest of the world building.
That's such an interesting process. I feel like that sounds really good, but also the fact that you've thought about the themes that you want to talk through in the piece. Like, I never think about themes. How are you thinking about themes?
I don't know. I need to, like, I feel like themes is what like dictates like which direction the story goes, and like what, like kind of like what the characters do, what they don't do, like basically their actions.
Yeah. And you've got when it comes to Project Orbit, you've got multiple POVs, no? Like several main characters?
Yes, I have 3 main characters, and like in each book they all go through some sort of character arc, whether that's positive or negative.
And did you have to comment where you like this character is more going to be representative of this theme, or is it like you have an overarching theme and they each represent it in different ways?
Yeah, so I have, so for Project Orbit, I do have like an overarching theme, and each of them kind of represent like a different aspect of it.
Interesting.
That's
so good. Like, because you went really deep in your thinking process to prep for it. So that's really great. I'll just check what Laura's saying, because that was related to the previous question. What has been challenging for me is I love writing, I cannot pronounce that word, onomatopoeia, I think. But that had me literally write pew, pew, pew. Oh my God, Laura, I read a series that is really fun. It's actually quite well written, where the author literally wrote pew, pew for when the characters are shooting something with their blaster guns. Like, and it cracked me up every single time, because I was just like, I mean, it's great, but also sort of childish in a fun way.
It's kind of like comic book kind of stuff.
It took away from the seriousness of, oh, they're killing people.
I can imagine laughing at that too.
Oh my god. Yeah, but it was still good. It's called Only Bad Options. That's the first book in the series. And it's probably a comp for my book as well. But I did not realize until after reading rereading book 1 so I could read book 2 that it's definitely another Reylo fanfic. So Kylo Ren and Star Wars, because I was such an idiot to not realize this, because so many elements are so Star Wars. Like, I don't even understand how I couldn't see this until later. I was just like completely oblivious reading this. Like, what a fun sci-fi concept. Oh, they've got things called storm swords that are essentially lasers. Oh, they use telepathic powers and and have something that's essentially the force. Oh my god. And it took me for me to reread it to realize this. I so
Mhm.
dumb. But yeah. But
It's
that
so
she writes pew 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 in it a lot. I'll answer that question as well, which is sort of I've already half answered it, I guess, because for me it was all the world building that I did previously. And when I did the world building, I had no idea what I knew my premise. I knew sort of my elevator pitch of it's going to be a space princess. She's on the run and she's going to have a love story with this character who's the most wanted man in the galaxy. But I didn't know anything else. I hadn't started writing, and I like to pants a bit my characters at first to figure them out and figure their personality.
Mhm.
So even though I now would consider myself more of an outliner, um, like I've transformed myself during NaNoWriMo of last year. I pantsed the first half of the book for sure, and I did not know what I was doing. But because I had the world building, I think it was fine. And it's only when I got to a point where I was like, I need to figure out why they're doing this and what's going to happen next, that I decided to outline. And when it comes to the world building, I used Notion because I feel like are you also a Notion girly, or are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved it for this specifically. I feel like I did a lot of a almost like a book bible, like
Mhm.
having all of my world building elements in it. And I'll share very very briefly, without going into details, sort of what it looks like. I have an image that's missing actually, but that's fine. Present, share screen. Can I share a window? Yes, this should work. Is this working? Yes.
Oh, I
So
love.
I'm not gonna lie, like I haven't put an image for everything, but essentially the first bit that I did was going through the houses, which is the political system. I wanted to have a deep think about spaceships because I knew a lot of the book was going to happen inside a spaceship. So I did a lot of, research around what it should look like and what realistically people say a spaceship will look like. And a lot of people were like, oh, it's going to have more rounded designs because then it will be easier to fly through space, essentially. And then I was like, okay, what sort of spaceships will I have? And I was thinking, okay, there'll be some merchant types, there'll be some purpose spaceships like a research one or like a courier one, hospital ships. There'll be pleasure spacecrafts like people who just go on cruising type, etc. So had to think about all of that, had to think a little bit about the history and the politics. And this is like the psychology of space travel, which is where I put some ideas towards this, some of the locations, religions, etc. But yeah, that was the process I went through, because I was like, if I don't know this, I will stop every time I'm writing to try to think about it.
Right.
And I needed to know in advance.
Oh my god, that was so cool. I've actually I've never used not world building. I've never used Notion for world building. I've used it more for just linking and organizing my documents.
Yeah. What do you use for your world building? Like to keep your notes and everything?
I use Google Docs for everything. So like
Right.
everything that is not in manuscript words is in a single Google Docs. And right now that I think that document is like 90 pages.
Oh my god.
Everything. It's world building, character profiles, anything you can think of that's not
Wow. That's
Yeah,
intense, but also, you know, if that's the system that works for you and you know
mhm,
you can refer back to it
yeah,
easily, then I think that's great. It's just
yeah,
this was also my first time using Notion that way for like proper world building. And I'm glad I did it that way because I find it quite easy to find the information again. And then that was my main thing. It was like there's going to be so much
mhm,
like details about what is this called, etc., that I need to be able to go back to it and find it whenever I'm writing instead of have to be like bracket whatever I call that university, whatever I call this planet, or
mhm.
whatever space station this is.
Yeah, for me, what I do is I use the header format in Google Docs to label everything, so I can easily go back and forth.
Nice. Oh yeah, because then you can make a little
Yeah,
summary of
yeah,
all of that, which is great.
yeah. The outline thing. That's what I meant.
Yeah. No, no, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Oh, and we have a wild Caitlin. Hi, how's it going? Caitlin, we're currently talking about the process we went through to prep for writing science fiction, and it's a lot of world building, I think, for both of us. But we both found world building quite fun, which is the good thing. It wasn't daunting, at least. Uh, yeah. And Caitlin agrees. The brackets help with world building details not created yet. Yeah, I've got a few still to be honest, but not for the big stuff. More for I don't know what to call this character. Or like at some point, my characters are on a planet where you have this group of mercenaries who are sort of terrorizing the local population, let's say, and I I had like a half idea of what to call them, so I've just put that name in bracket because I was like, this is going to change. And consistently, I have the brackets for this because I'm like, that doesn't matter. There's just one detail I can just go back and change. But things like the houses' names and things like that, like there are more big important details that are going to come back again and again and again. I needed to know from the start so that it wasn't going to be too difficult to
Mhm.
because otherwise I stop. I just don't write. I'm just struggling and I'm like, I need to find that name.
Yeah, that makes sense. And having and like not knowing like any of the names, which is like crowded document with just brackets
Yeah,
everywhere and a
yeah.
little
And
searching.
also, I feel like when you have the proper names for certain things that are very sci-fi, like for instance, what are you calling, I don't know, like the poly plastic cuffs that I had, to that type of thing. It helps me to get in the mood of sci-fi when I have a proper name for them, because then I'm like, that sounds very sci-fi. And it's not like I'm writing whatever handcuffs, you know?
Right.
So I've got 10 questions in total, so I still have three. So I was going to suggest I put up the next one now. We've talked a lot, to be honest. We've talked a
Wait,
lot about this one, so we don't have to go through this one. So technically, I have two left. Shall we do another sprint? I'll just put this one up, and then we can start sprinting and answer it afterwards when we come back. How do we feel about again, like maybe 20 minutes or so?
yep,
Yeah.
that was
Perfect. I just need to go get that ready. Um, and Laura, I am using all of your Aurora Borealis timers because they're perfect for this sci-fi field. Present, share screen. This one, I don't think I've used this one. I think I used the 25 minutes one before. So there we go. And if we are ready, I'll get us started in 3, 2, 1. And we're done with the second sprint. Just closing that tab because it was automatically playing the next one. Very nice. How did it go for you? What did you do?
It went well. I'm trying to combine two chapters together, and I finished like the first part section. So now I'm moving on to the second chapter. As like,
Nice. Are you still in that really difficult
yeah,
chapter, like the one? You're like, I'm gonna be in that one for a while.
yeah. But like there's like this event, like mini event thingy that happens, and I think I'm just gonna delete it because it really doesn't impact much. I think that was like the main problem.
Fair. Yeah, I find that sometimes I'll have put stuff in my books that I later on feel serve no purpose and just are sort of filler. I'm like, I don't need this extra filler when I'm already a novel writer.
Yeah.
But yeah. I got about 600 words. I'm deep. It's like since I've stopped caring about the words, because if anything, I need to write less of them. Suddenly I write more of them. Because I'm approaching the end, and I was working on a flashback scene that is sort of a big, not really a big revelation anymore, because it's been built up so much that at this point, when you read it, you know what this is going to be about. But it was an important scene to establish, and I wanted to write it because essentially, um, my main character is 25 in the book, but this is a flashback from when she was 14 that was very important to what became of her and why she's like this.
Interesting.
So it was sort of fun to write, which is also why I went quite speedily on it. But yeah, I'm not finished with it yet, but I'm very close to finishing it. So then afterwards, that's another beat done, which I'm excited about again. Just being able to cross beats off every single time is quite nice. But yeah, I see there's also Anna, who is telling us she spent the whole sprint trying to decide on a dress for a bridal shower, but it is done. Ooh, nice, exciting. That's fun. Is it a friend's wedding? And when is the wedding happening? Is it in summer this year? Do you have to wear several different types of dresses? Because are you invited to, I don't know what Americans call it, but hen do? So uh, is that the bridal shower? I'm not sure. It's when you celebrate with the bride and all the bridesmaids. Exciting. So the question I had on screen, one of the last two, is how do you overcome being intimidated by a genre like sci-fi? But to be fair, were you even intimidated at all when you first started writing, or were you like, no, this is fine, this is just writing?
Yeah, I think when I first started, that very first novel that was inspired by my environmental science class, I was mainly having fun, and like yeah, I look back at it because like that project is now shelved. I mean, I think one day if I don't have any other story ideas, I may come back to it because like there are some world building elements that I did that just doesn't make sense in hindsight.
Mm,
So I guess that was like my trial run, my trial project when it came to sci-fi.
yeah.
But now it's kind of just like my process that we talked about earlier. And that's how I kind of handled like not being intimidated. By trying to like break down the world building into like an initial stage, the characters, and then the rest of it.
Yeah. Because I feel like, I mean, anyone would normally build up their characters at some point or another anyway, regardless of the genre.
Mhm.
So that's sort of universal experience as writers. But the world building is what I think makes it, essentially the harder part of being sci-fi is you got to make sure that feels realistic and that feels right.
Yeah, so when it comes to world building, I only try to figure out like what the story needs or like things that are relevant for the reader to know up to that certain point in a story. And
Yeah.
then like basically like as things become more relevant.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. I see what you mean. And to be fair, I find that it's a genre that I think intimidates a lot of people, because a lot of people tend to think immediately of more the hard science side of sci-fi, which you don't have to write that, and you don't have to start by writing that, but also how to make things feel and sound realistic. And I think some people think, oh, if it doesn't sound realistic enough, then I shouldn't write it. When it's like, you should just give it a try and then see, because you
Yeah.
surprise yourself, I find. Yeah. And especially when it comes to sci-fi, I find that reading a lot of it helped, but also watching a lot of it. Because when I first started the world building, I was like, I don't really know what to name this or what to, like, there were a lot of elements I didn't think about that would be necessary to the world building, like small things,
Yeah.
like the communication devices and things like that, that you might not think immediately. What would it be? What would it be called, etc. And then it was when I started rewatching season 1 of The Expanse, I started taking notes while I was watching of things that they said. Um, that was like, that could be useful to make it feel more realistically sci-fi. Like, I think at some point, what did I wrote down, literally, I wrote down the sentence, "You are cleared for station dock at berth C4." And it was like just a sentence they said in, but it feels such a sci-fi type of sentence. And that's all you need, is sort of adding these little elements here and there to make it feel more realistic.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like it's like whenever you watch sci-fi show or movie, it's like these little things that you notice that give you ideas for your own project.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like, I think I was reading something where the character had magnetic boots, and there was like, I need to include mag boots in my book. Like, that's what I needed.
Actually in the show for Halo in the second season, like a character was walking and I was like, wait, how is he walking? Like how is he not floating? And I realized it was the magnetic boots.
Yes. And I love that there are some universal concepts that, even though this is futuristic and we don't know what we're going to invent, we're like, well, people are actively working towards trying to make this happen, therefore that might happen, therefore we should use this as a device. But yeah, I think that's a lot of, to be fair, a lot of sci-fi to me is answered, like, the question, how are you not intimidated by it, is just world building. It's just create enough details, and details can be small, like, it doesn't have to be what your solar system is like, what your planet is like. It can really just be, what is a sentence your character would say when they're docking the ship at a space station? Like, how do they formulate that? And that's been such a huge part of, in my act 3, of trying to figure out, because there are several events when they're opening the hatch of the ship to let something out in the middle of being in space and stuff like that. And I was like, how would they communicate between each other through the comms, like the intercoms on the ship, and be like, you know, when like on ships, people will repeat their name and then say the other ship's name and then say over, that kind of stuff. Like, just the messaging system is such a small detail, but I feel like it gives that realism aspect.
Yeah, I agree. It's like those little details that kind of like it makes it seem like you have done
Yeah.
a lot of building even if you haven't.
Yes.
Like
And then
that iceberg analogy.
the what? Sorry.
It's kind of like that iceberg analogy,
Yeah.
like under the water.
But yeah, but also really, like, kind of similar to the iceberg analogy. The thing is, when you do the world building, you have so much that's under the surface that you haven't talked about in the book. But because you know it's there, when you just show the tip, people know you know more.
Yeah,
People, like, it reads as though there is more behind this. And I feel like that's how you do a good exposition without really doing exposition, is by just having small mention of certain things that you don't have to go in details explaining, but makes it clear to the readers, oh, we're talking about this element here, which means there's a lot more under the surface.
right. Yeah, I was watching a while ago Brandon Sanderson's lectures on YouTube, and
Yeah.
he used that iceberg analogy, and he said that it's like the iceberg except below the water the iceberg is hollow.
Yeah.
seem like you've done a lot of world building, but you actually haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. And if like even if you have, that's the problem that I found. I mean, it's a good problem to have, is sometimes I have made so much preparatory work in the world building that I'm like, I need to expose everything in this. Like I need to talk about the entire details of this thing that I've made. And it's just like, well, how do I dump this information without doing info dump? But yeah.
Yeah,
Um
I feel
I've
like
got
when it comes to like trying to actually convey those like world building details, it really just depends on like the characters or like why it's relevant to the story. Because if it's not relevant, then like then it's kind of like no use mentioning it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like I have so many things that I have prepared that I think will be more relevant to book two almost.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so frustrating not to be able to use them right now. But I'm like, it makes no point. Like there's no sense in using this right now. And like for instance, I've got like a whole religion that you there I see a lot of in this, like it's a religion where they believe that their god called the Endless will come to Earth in the form of an android robot because humans are too fragile and not like they're too imperfect.
Mhm.
And so they believe that the only way a god will ever happen to come to Earth, or not Earth in this case, it's called Solar, but the only way it will happen is if it comes into the form of an android bot. And because of that, it's a violent religion. There, it's very inspired by the religion in Game of Thrones a little bit. You know, like I don't know whether have you not? But anyway, they're trying to take over politically, which is why they're quite invasive, and they have very strict rules about androids cannot be too human-like, because if they are, then they might be fake versions of the god, like fake gods.
Oh, I see.
So they destroy any android which is too human-like. And obviously, my main character's best friend is an android robot that is way too human-like, which is another reason why she's on the run.
Oh, wait, that is so cool the way you the way you tied everything together.
That's the thing, is because I did all that world building prep, it sort of ties itself.
Right.
And I never realized how important that was until I started writing sci-fi, because it was like, I don't have other books that are set in a completely different world. All of my other books, even though they're paranormal or supernatural, they happen in our world
Mhm.
with an underground version of like supernatural stuff going on. So this is the first time that I was like, this is completely different. I need to make up everything. And because of that, things just naturally start tying themselves to each other,
Yes, I found that too happening.
which is really fun when it happens. I have like one last question, because we've really covered a lot about the world building. And I don't know whether you did use any specific writing craft books, or maybe YouTube channels, or what sort of research helped you to create all of these elements, whether it's even just ChatGPT, because I definitely have used ChatGPT a bit. The one book that I read when I was doing my world building was this one, putting the science and fiction. There we go. Sorry. I'm like, how do I present this? Putting the Science and Fiction by Dan Cobbold. I'll put the name. Do you know what? I'll put his blog link in the chat, because he also has a blog where he talks. There's a lot of articles about sci-fi and how to write realistic things, and it's all about the science stuff. So it's literally, like for instance, there's a chapter called Misconceptions About Memory, and each chapter is written by a different expert in that domain. So this one is wildlife biology, for instance. They're all about different things, and I skipped some that weren't interesting for me. But for instance, there's a chapter on science fiction cell phones, things like believable nanotechnology, etc. So it was really like interesting for me, because it helped think about what I needed for my world building. As in, even if I was like writing this book, I'd be like, oh man, I need a device for this, or I need something that does this, or like, what kind of cars are they using, or do they have public transport? And you don't think about all of these aspects until you're in it. So
Right.
this helped me think about all of these different aspects first.
Oh, that's very cool. I definitely need to get my hands on that.
And I think it's based off his blog. So the blog has more articles that have come out since then on completely different topics. Like when I click on the link, I think the first one is about making realistic animals in fiction. The second one is common misconceptions about surviving extreme cold. So it's just like sciencey things that we can use in a sci-fi setting. But yeah.
Yeah, I personally have not read any craft books that are specifically geared towards sci-fi, but I have read oh my god, what's it called? It's called wait, 1 second. I think it's on writing and world building by Timothy Hickson. I believe that's his name.
Is this because Anna literally just posted?
Yes, it's that one.
Oh my god! Okay, I need to read it then.
And like it's more like it is like it. I mean, it is more geared towards fantasy, but I feel like it's still helpful because like he goes into a lot of like how to convey world building elements, because it's one thing to world build and it's another thing to actually get those elements across to your reader.
Yeah.
So he kind of like gives tips for that, which I found very helpful.
That's great. I should read that. And especially since if it's helpful in general for any type of world building, I still use some aspects of world building in my other books, even though they're not taking over our world, but that's always useful.
Yeah, there's 2 volumes.
2 volumes, okay. And I think you also mentioned Brendan Sanderson, which is also, I think, a great recommendation in general for fantasy and sci-fi, because he writes both and he has a series of lessons that are available on YouTube. So definitely would also recommend that. Lynn also said, as an overwriter, I feel like writing a sci-fi would be a 10 plus years project, not try and make it to the end. Well, I'm an overwriter as well. And to be fair, at some point, you reach a point in the book where you're like, I just need to hit those beats. Like, I don't need words anymore. I have too many. I just need to hit the next point in the story, which is where I'm at right now.
For me, as a writer, for my zero drafts, I basically skip out on description. I just don't write any description. It's just
you do that after? No? Is that not like something you do during the revision process?
Yeah, that's something that I'll do later, like later. Like not even right now. I'm not even worrying about description in this revision round. Because like description is just something that I guess I struggle with. So I want to like dedicate like a whole round just for description.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like when I was pantsing my way through the first half of my book, I was spending a lot more time specifically on some descriptions of some things. And I feel like that was also a big part of, apart from the world building, because I didn't know those aspects before, so I hadn't prepared them. But like at some point, my characters arrive on a space station that is essentially a pirate haven. And the way I wrote it was I went to research actual pirate havens, like from the I'm going to say the wrong dates here, from the 1700s question mark. When was the golden age of pirates? I do not know. Golden age of piracy. I was not wrong. It started in 1650 and ended in 1730. So when I said the 1700s, it was close.
You were very close.
But yeah, I actually researched like Tortuga and those places because I was like, I need to have that, but in space. Like I need that, but like instead of ships, it's spaceships, you know? So yeah, I feel like a part of world building is just getting inspired by the real world and adapting it to your universe and just transforming it into something different.
Yes, I love that. That's definitely something that resonates with me.
Yeah, and like another part of it is asking ChatGPT.
Yeah.
What will the internet be named in 2000 years?
I think I literally asked it something like, is it possible for a moon to crash into a planet or something?
Yeah, that's the kind of question I would also ask ChatGPT, because I'd be like, I don't know this, and it'll
Right.
find me an answer much quicker than Googling it. So, yeah.
It's hard to it's hard to like Google theoretical questions.
Yeah, and the other way I use it, but that's not specific to sci-fi, is I ask a lot of if I can't think of a word, it's so much easier to explain my random thoughts that are leading to what that word should be than in ChatGPT than it is in Google. Like if I try to Google what I don't know, I'm just like, I don't know, it's like a word that means this or that, and
Or what I don't.
ChatGPT was ChatGPT is in my brain. It knows what I'm thinking of.
Right.
And I'm so sorry, Minuk. We're gonna leave quite soon, I think, because we said 2 hours 30 and it's been 2 hours 26 minutes. But thank you for joining us for a couple of minutes. Feel free to watch the replay if you're interested in sci-fi and writing sci-fi in general. But yeah, I think we've covered everything. These were all my questions. I can't believe we were so productive in answering all 10 of them.
I know.
And still managed to do 2 sprints as well, so pretty productive. Is there anything that you want to plug in or talk about, or to outro yourself? Again, I have put the link to your Instagram in the description.
No, not much to say. Just thank you so much for having me here.
It's been so fun, and I'm glad that the connection was good on your phone. It worked really well.
Yeah.
If I tried to do that, that would never work with my phone.
Yeah, I don't know. Like my camera just gave out like 10 minutes before, and I'm like, no.
But it went okay. It was fine.
Yeah.
And like it's just us and 6 friends, So I'm not too worried. Lynn is saying watching or reading what others have done is so inspirational too, and making changes to fit your world. 100%. I feel like this is why I started rewatching The Expanse while I was writing sci-fi, because I get really inspired by the way they're acting is so sci-fi-esque, and I needed to be plunged into those kinds of universe to know what to make my characters do or say when it comes to, docking your ship, etc., that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, Minuk. I just put the kiddos to bed. Zaynab's Instagram post about her planets. Yes, go look at those. Fantastic. I don't really have anything to plug either, to be honest. Just if anyone's interested in more of this type of thing, I'm probably going to do like a thematic live stream every now and then. I don't have plans specifically to do like once a month or something, but in general, it's been really fun, and I've really enjoyed myself doing this with you, Zaynab. So thank you for coming.
Much. Like, thank you for coming up with this idea.
I just felt like I was back into this book, and I was like, I feel like we should talk about writing sci-fi. It's fun, and yeah. But yeah, thank you for coming, guys. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this. And on this note, do I have an outro? I don't have an outro, so it's gonna be a cold leave. I'm just gonna end the stream just like this. Thank you, guys. Cheers. Bye. End stream.